Have you always believed that you have certain problems and symptoms that no one else has to deal with? Well, then please don't freak out when you hear about the 15 issues in today's video, because these are actually very specific to people with childhood trauma. So I will present to you now 15 symptoms one by one and explain to you how they are related to early trauma, and you will be surprised how applicable they will be. And in the end, I will give to you some treatment ideas to break free from these symptoms, so definitely stick with me for the whole video so you won't miss out that part. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert, and this video is a collection of symptoms that I personally deal with or that I have observed in other people, read about in books, on Reddit and YouTube comments. And today I'd like to directly dive into symptom number 1, which is oddly specific. And we talk about indirect grief and resentment in this first symptom. Now, indirect grief and resentment occurs when buried emotions, for example, such as sadness or anger, things like these surface in sideways. So they are triggered when you go out, for example, and you see happy couples. When you have friends, I read that on YouTube quite often, you visit your friends and you see how they are, for example, playing with their kids, how enjoyable and nice the childhood of their kids is, and how healthy the parents or your friends, maybe your friend with a couple and their parents, and you see how healthy their relationship is. Or another point where this could occur is when you see, for example, pets or babies who are not cared for, who are not treated well. And all these emotions or all these trigger situations, they remind you to how unhealthy or how difficult your own childhood was, and they trigger you and bring those emotions up. Indirect grief and resentment, I looked that up, and what I saw is that it's also pretty similar to jealousy. So when we have a look at the emotion wheel, which you can, by the way, download for free in our workbook at understandable.net/book, then you see that being jealousy is very closely related to the emotion of resentment, which are both, by the way, pretty angry emotions. What's also typical here is that the indirect grief and resentment, when you experience that, is also related to a disorganized and chaotic attachment style. And when we go back to childhood, when we have a look where it's actually rooted, then I think it's quite obvious that someone who experienced indirect grief and resentment, he or she was growing up in a toxic family system where the person have been neglected early on. And maybe your parents' marriage or their relationship was quite unhealthy. They maybe had a horrible relationship, just give the child a name. And you always had to suppress grief, anger, within that toxic family system at home, for example, to not make things worse because their relationship, the relationship of your parents already was pretty horrible. Sign number 2 is what I call the hypervigilant sleeper. And this is basically what you can see when you can't sleep with other people in the same bed or in the same room. And I'm laughing here because this is so me. And I'm looking for a solution for that for such a long time now. But I observed that, at least for me, it somewhere started during my intimate relationships. Then it also, broadened itself to my friendships. And I'm living here in a 2-bedroom apartment. So there is 1 bedroom, and you can't really close the door of the bedroom, because it's a sliding door and it's slightly open, so you can hear everything what's happening in this room. That's the other room. And at some point, when friends came over visiting from other cities and they stayed at my place for a couple of days, I just couldn't sleep. I was hypervigilant the whole night, and I couldn't relax. So what I did was I took out the fridge from the kitchen, because the kitchen is the only room, besides the bathroom, where you can completely close the door and where it's soundproof. Okay, so I took the fridge and I moved it into the bathroom, because then I had another sleeping space within the kitchen, and you could put like a bed there, and someone could sleep there. So I had more isolation, and I had more like a boundary. The door would be the boundary then. So I'm definitely affected by that. I'm a hypervigilant sleeper, and for me it appears when someone is in the same room, and it makes relationships, especially intimate relationships, really hard. When someone is in the same room, it feels like the more I relax, the more I get vigilant and alert. And entering the hypervigilant state is basically what happens when our central nervous system is actually super activated. It's an alert state. Now, I always try to explain that using models of the central nervous system. I use the polyvagal model here. And in the polyvagal model, you have basically 3 states. You have the relaxed state. This is what we call the ventral vagal state. Then we have the flight or fight state. That's the sympathetic state. And then we have the free state. And when we are in a hyper alert state, we are somewhere in the flight area. Okay, we experience panic, fear, anxiety, or we are in the freeze area, somewhere where we experiencing dissociation or numbness, and we shut down. So those are the 2 states that are usually related to that. Fight state is also possible sometimes. Is when we become resentful again. Let's say you sleep with someone in the same room and you become resentful because you just can't sleep, and you have anyone to blame for. So those are dysregulated states of the central nervous system. And when we look in childhood where this actually comes from, then it usually comes from violated boundaries in childhood, or could also happen later. When people can't really sleep, what's also typical is an unpredictable environment. So this could be a cause for it, especially in childhood, when your parents' relationship again was very toxic, was not safe and secure. So your parents were fighting at night maybe. Or when a caregiver was present and then they may wake you up. That could also be a reason. Or when you, for example, when you were the person who had like a really difficult sleep and you have really light sleep patterns, so you wake up quite often, and then you woke up your parents by accident when you slept with them in the same bed or room, and they punished you for that. Now, symptom number 3 is what I call the naked or Sphinx cat. Let me explain that to you. The naked cat, those are people who feel socially exposed and transparent. And they often feel naked, like the Sphinx cat, which is a specific cat race which has no fur. And when you experience that, then you sense that everybody could see through you. So it's like they see your thoughts, they see your flaws, your vulnerabilities, and they leave you feeling raw, feeling overly visible and unsafe in a way. And when you have that, I have that, for example, in city centers. So when there are a lot of people, a lot of stimuli, when it's really busy, or when you're in a full room of people, then you might experience that. And it's a typical symptom here of complex trauma. What that basically is it's hypervigilance in social settings. So your central nervous system is again on high alert. And when you have that, you may have the tendency to isolate, like we described in the past video here. Where is that rooted in childhood trauma? Well, it's often linked to shame around parts of ourselves. So we feel ashamed or exposed for specific parts that are within us. For example, it could be specific emotions. If your parents continuously told you to not show specific emotions, to not show specific needs, that specific emotions and needs are too much maybe, or that there were controlling caregivers that made us feel constantly judged or shamed for what we are or who we are. It's also displayed here in the cycle of toxic shame, which I made a full episode about, which I will link to you up here, but I also want to explain it to you real quick right now. Now, what happens in the cycle of toxic shame is that when spontaneous emotions arise, which is typical for being human, especially that's what happens in childhood then. Okay, you want something, or you feel vulnerable, you feel angry, you feel sad, and you express this spontaneously arising emotions to your caregivers maybe. They were really controlling, they were tough, they don't allow you to feel that. Then you get the feedback from them that you shouldn't feel this specific emotion. And what it develops then is a sensation of toxic shame, because you think, well, when I shouldn't feel that, but I feel that actually, I do feel that, then that's not okay. I'm not okay. What you develop then is like a persona. We all also talk about masking here, about a character that we build within us. A part of our identity becomes this ideal persona who does not have emotions such as anger or grief. And some people who continuously hide these specific parts of their personality, they develop strategies to overplay that, which are called compensating strategies. Those can be grandiose thoughts. For example, they say, I have such an amazing car, I have such an amazing job, I'm such an amazing person on the outside. They do that to overplay that they're actually pretty weak and vulnerable on the inside. Or they have degrading thoughts and they put themselves in the role of victim and say, well, I'm the worst person on the planet. Those two things are both not true, but they're compensating strategies for a really, really hurt inner child. And those people often also develop some form of addictions, because addictions, that's another point here. Addictions also help us to cope and to keep us regulated and distracted from those parts of our personalities which we pushed away. But at some point it will cause exhaustion, because this is, well, that's hell a lot of shit that you carry around there if you're constantly trying to play a specific persona and trying to hide these parts. So we end up in depression, in exhaustion here, in burnout, and that makes us to withdraw and to isolate ourselves, because there is no other option. We can't show ourselves continuously playing this role in social situations. It's so exhausting. We are addicted to things just to keep us alive, so we end up in burnout and isolate. But we somehow, of course, because that's life, we get into social situations again, and then we show spontaneous emotions that arise within us, and then the whole cycle continues and starts again. Now, where's that rooted in childhood? It's actually rooted when we started to perceive ourselves as inherently flawed. So somewhere in childhood, we build up a shame-bound identity. And in neurodivergent people, for example, people with autism, is also related to masking. Masking is also hiding specific emotions, hiding specific parts that we don't like to show other people. Highly sensitive people are also prone to that due to their heightened perception of stimuli. And Tim Fletcher, for example, he's also on YouTube. I'll link that video to you below as well. He created a model of a shame-bound persona, which is actually what's happening here. So we have this real self-core. The real self-core, it has these emotions such as anger and grief, for example, that we like to hide. And then we have this shame-based self, the critic around that. That's the part in us who says, it's not okay to show grief, it's not okay to show anger because our parents told us not to show that. And around that we build the persona and the ideal self. So this is basically what we do here. If you often have the sensation of feeling thin-skinned, of feeling permeable, like a naked cat, then one thing which is very, very helpful is setting healthy boundaries here. This can be a true game changer. I personally learned that in hypnotherapy, And I built a course around it on our premium platform. So if you want to learn how to set healthy boundaries, also in other courses, how to communicate your emotions, how to express specific needs, then get access to all of my classes on understandable.net/join. You can become a member also of our community. Go to understandable.net/join and start with the courses today so you can finally set healthy boundaries. Symptom number 4, which we're talking about, is phantom criticism. Phantom criticism, that means that you constantly feel judged in a way. And I describe it as other people want the worst for you. I also have that. And it's a sensation or a belief that other people do not want the best for you, but they want the worst for you. They want to see you suffer in a way. And this is a phantom in our head. This is actually not real. Well, there are some psychopaths out there, but it's definitely not true that every person on the world here on the planet wants the worst for you. You feel like if you have that you're in danger or disapproval, and that even before it appears, or it actually will never appear because the other person is not just like you assume. And what's typical here is as well, when you have this belief that people want the worst for you, then you constantly overthink and overanalyze social situations. And you do that because there is this traumatized part within you, this phantom, which is trying to continuously find out if there is anything wrong with the other person. But not every person, again, is a narcissist or a psychopath. So often, it's just that we overanalyze and overthink social situations, but it actually doesn't help us. Where that rooted in childhood? Well, it's rooted there that we as children have been constantly criticized, of course. So we really have this belief deep down within us that whatever we do or however we are or what we feel, what we think, that's not okay. And other people would judge us for that or would criticize us for that. For example, okay, I make a mistake here in this video and you as the audience, you will hate me and you will try to punish me, but that's a phantom in my head. This is not what's actually happening. Well, what's also typical for someone who has this belief is that at least one of the caregivers, the mom or the dad quite often, were narcissist or had narcissistic tendencies. And often the sensitive child or the most sensitive child in the family is the person who is affected the most by phantom criticism. And this is because the sensitive child always has the biggest emotional capacity for their parents' criticism. So when you're not that sensitive, then you don't have a lot of capacity. So maybe you have this brother or this sister, and they are not influenced at all by criticism. They also don't believe that people want the worst for them. This is because they didn't have the capacity for all the criticism of the parents. And it's actually also interesting to talk about that, because when you have someone who is criticizing, then you also have to be, there has to be a counterpart who also takes this criticism. Because when you just wouldn't care as a child already, because you're not that sensitive to criticism, then you were just like, well, whatever, that's bullshit. But the sensitive child is not like this. The sensitive child, the neurodivergent child, is taking things personally quite more often. Because they also have empathy and they don't understand if the parent is a narcissist or a psychopath or if they have problems re-regulating themselves. No, they feel that the parent is somehow suffering or is somehow dysregulated, and they want to help them. They want to be empathetic with their parents. This behavior is also tied to emotional dysregulation. And emotional dysregulation is when you overreact to perceived criticism. It's important to mention that it's perceived. So maybe someone is criticized and they just don't care. So they perceive specific criticism that you get triggered by as irrelevant, for example. What's also typical here is children who have an anxious attachment style. They have an abandonment fear, which is predominant here in their attachment style. They also react more to criticism. Symptom number 5, the race car driver. So what is the worst thing for a race car driver? Slowing down. Getting tired and slowing down is a trigger for some people. And I call those people race car drivers. And that's it's a pretty common trauma symptom actually. Getting sick as well is another one which falls into that category. And people who are race car drivers, who get triggered by slowing down, by getting tired, they often also are perfectionists and they often also are high achievers. At least this is what they call themselves. And they do that because rest is for them associated with failure, with abandonment or inadequacy. They never relax and instead they push themselves beyond boundaries, and they often also are the ones who end up in burnout, emotional exhaustion or depression or things like these. So where is that rooted in childhood? Well, it's quite often that your parents only love you if you did X, Y, Z. And for example, if your grades were good, if you were the best in the sports team, if you were a nice child, a brave child, a tough child. So what's basically happening here is performance-bound love, which is applicable to many people. And when you learn that you only are loved and you only are worthy and okay if you bring a specific performance, then you associate rest with laziness because you were punished for failure. And that's again linked to the cycle of toxic shame here again. Symptom number 6 is what I call the joker. And the joker, aka the traumatized clown, he or she laughs about his or her pain. And the joker appears whenever talking about your trauma and you sense pain. You have this pain from the past. In order to not get in touch with that pain, you start laughing about it instead. And this laughing does not come from a place that you are already healed or that you're easygoing with it. That was a tough childhood, guys. It was so easy. I already healed all this stuff. No, this is not the reason. The reason is because you avoid facing intense, painful emotions. So you do not take your pain seriously in the here and now. This is a coping mechanism to minimize your struggles. Where is that rooted in the past? Definitely within a toxic family system. Again, expressing sadness, anger, grief, those things were not allowed. And the child often has been punished for showing them. Go to your room, lock the door, don't get back here before you are settled down. So it was bad to show those emotions for the child. And it learned earlier on that hiding these emotions behind humor is a good thing and a working coping strategy here. Symptom number 7, maladaptive daydreaming. Well, some people are afraid to fall asleep, like me with someone else in the room. Others want to sleep and dream all day long. Both sides are, in a way, difficult and definitely a symptom of early trauma here. Maladaptive daydreaming is also a coping strategy to cope with stress or with boredom or emotional pain here, of course. And daydreaming then becomes their escape. So there is a fantasy world within their heads, which then is a place to go when things in the real world become too difficult. For some people, it's just withdrawing into the head. For others, it's playing video games, but also reading books are similar escapes in the same category here. Where's that rooted in the childhood? Well, maladaptive daydreaming especially appears for highly sensitive children, for introverts, but also for neurodivergent people, because for those people, inner life is often richer than outer life. They have a really big capacity for inner fantasy and spending time with themselves. They love that. And is also a response to emotional neglect or when the caregiver relationship was unsafe. So, for example, when the parents were constantly fighting. Then daydreaming is also a form of dissociation. That means disconnecting from the painful reality, disconnecting from the world here and just withdrawing into ourselves. That's dissociation. And it also, it's working, it's definitely a strategy, but it also takes away the experiences that you could make in the real world, of course, because you often withdraw. So you might miss out some things. Symptom number 8 is what I call Ditto. And if you have played the game Pokemon in your life, then you may know this little creature. I think it was already there in the early game, so it's alive for such a long time, this creature. And Ditto is a pink little creature which can adapt and mimic every other being. And maybe you already know where I'm going right now. Because many trauma survivors are really good shapeshifters, such as Ditto. And adapting to fit in social groups around you is what they typically do in order to feel connected with others. So they constantly adapt, but they actually do not really have the feeling that they fit in truly somewhere. So maybe sometimes they try to fit in the fitness community, sometimes they try to fit in the investors, sometimes they try to fit in the party people, sometimes they try to fit in the wise people, the bookworms. They are basically social chameleons. And a benefit of that is definitely that you appear easygoing and everyone really likes you. So if you're addicted to harmony, that works pretty well here. But there are also a lot of costs. And the cost side is that you actually lose your own sense of self. So you partly give up your own identity. Where is this rooted in childhood? Well, when safety and approval in childhood were related to pleasing others, then you learned that it's better to please others in order to be loved. When you have been neurodivergent, for example, autistic, having ADHD, or just being a highly sensitive people, then you already may have the sensation from the beginning of your life that you are not really fitting in anywhere. Or you had really loud parents who were always talking about their own needs, but never having a look at your needs and what you need as a child. So what you try then is you try to adapt to them, try to calm down themselves before you by fulfilling their expectations and dealing with their needs. Symptom number 9 is what I call micromanaging conversations. And this appears when you're obsessing with every word that you say. It can happen during a conversation, it can happen after the conversation. I also have that sometimes when I record videos and I think, well, I just said this sentence or this word and it kind of bothers me the whole day and I think about it the whole night, even if it was just one word or one sentence. It doesn't make a lot of sense because people wouldn't probably hate you for one sentence. But this is what we do when we are micromanaging our conversations or video recordings here. I try to not overthink every word in today's video. I promise to you, and this is why I try this concept here where I script less than before. So I'm just talking intuitively and try to explain things by a few bullet points that I have here in front of me. And when we do that, when we overthink, the sensation which is actually happening there is that we are replaying and analyzing conversations in our head without a goal. It's just that we overthink and rotate them and spin them, obsessing small details like words or facial expressions. Where does that come from? It definitely comes from an unpredictable family environment again. It comes from saying wrong things that led to specific punishments. So if you said, for example, well, you know how children are, okay? They somehow, somewhere hear the word and they tell that to their parents, and the parents might get upset. Where did you get this word from? Or they get something political or whatever, an insultation. And saying those things got them punished. So they're super aware, they're trained, their nervous systems are trained to look out for specific words, and they know that specific words can create punishment. And they're afraid of being punished and abandoned from the earlier age already. Shame and fear of rejection are also a big part here. So the children they're very sensitive to the fear of abandonment here, because they relate that, okay, when I say a wrong word, then I get punished. I maybe got abandoned for saying that. So they're really afraid of that. And it's basically a learned hypervigilance here. It's a learned automatism of our central nervous system, which constantly puts us in this hyper alert state. And it's again connected to the polyvagal fear, which I explained earlier. Symptom number 10 is calmness before the storm. This happens to people when things in life go pretty well, and then they feel unsafe. And this is why they believe, well, there must be something bad that will inevitably follow as soon as things work out pretty well. So it comes from a sense of being prepared for the worst case when things are great. And this is what I call calmness before the storm here. Basically, you are super suspicious all the time when things in life are going well. And where does this come from? Well, from the early age, and this is what's interesting here, already from the early age, people are trained to always look for dangers and to always be ready for the storm. So it is so unfamiliar for them that things work out well and that things are going great, that being happy and being in a good place when everything is good is already a trigger. This is a trigger because it reminds them to be extra careful with things, because the storm could break through at any second. Obviously, a chaotic and unstable environment is what's standing behind this. It happens when parents often did fight, so the relationship with parents between themselves and between the parent and the child was continuously unstable. There were no weeks without fights, so it was ambivalent. Sometimes they loved each other, the parents, sometimes they loved the child, but sometimes they were fighting for the worst. And happiness and love were then, of course, not sustainable for the child. And it also learned that relationships are not a safe and stable thing. And often they are blindsided by conflict or trauma when things seem fine here. So hypervigilance is also a thing here that they learned early on already. And for them, normality since the early days was to live in chaos and constant storm. Symptom number 11 here is emotional delay. Now, emotions like sadness, like anger, frustration, they didn't show immediately after an event if you experience emotional delay. For example, a coworker or your partner wants something from you, and then you automatically say yes. Imagine you are in such a situation. But what's actually happening there is you actually wanted to say no, and you find out that later because you feel that somehow they cross your boundaries by asking you for that. Or someone maybe also disappointed you. Your partner or coworker may have disappointed you, and hours later you feel this disappointment when you lay in your bed in the evening and you somehow feel resentful, or you feel angry, or you feel sad, and you don't know why, but then you remember, well, yeah, they asked me for something and this kind of disappointed me. But you were not able to communicate and express that specific emotion within that situation, and you can train that. It's definitely trainable. I also have a course on the platform on how to express emotions, but a big part from doing that comes from actually being aware and training to feel emotions when they arise. You can train that. When you have this sensation and the symptom quite often that there is emotional delay for you, then try to practice creating awareness for your emotions. You can do that by using an emotion wheel. I have that here as well. And you can download our emotional wheel as well on it's in our free workbook again, understandable.net/book. There you can practice. It's a really good exercise, practicing to express your emotions. Now, where did it come from in childhood? Well, it definitely comes from that expressing emotions was not safe. You were often dissociating because if you stayed connected to your needs and you said no in specific situations, then you were punished by your parents. So again, your parents said it's wrong to have specific emotions such as grief, anger, sadness, disappointment, being vulnerable, those things. And it creates a lot of hypervigilance already in the child again, because he or she often was super alert around others as a child. And I've read a comment here also of someone saying it comes from knowing that you can't react to the abuse without it getting worse. And this is basically underlining it. Symptom number 12, hurry up for no one. When I was in university, we had a course called, I think, Stress Resilience with a psychiatrist or with a psychologist. Her name was Bettina Löhr. I think I made a podcast in the past with her, but it's in German. I think it's somewhere back. When you scroll back a lot, you will find that with Bettina Löhr. And she once told us in the class that, guys and girls, when you go to the train, when you have to catch a train or a bus, I see so many people rushing there. Of course, when you have to get a train last minute, then yeah, rush there. But most of the people, they have plenty of time. They could take a train later, or they could take another bus, or they have 10 minutes, but they walk there like they would have just 3. And this actually doesn't make sense, because it has no negative consequence if you just would walk more relaxed. So for who are you hurrying up then? And to me, it's stuck in my head for up to this day, and I sometimes think about it. Why am I rushing all the time? Why am I hurrying up? And it's just not necessary. But I have this sensation that I need to hurry up. And what that is it's an urge to rush also through tasks, through situations, even when there is no real urgency. And people who do that, they often treat basic things in life as life or death situations. And this is nonsense. It's a trauma symptom, of course. They have this internal pressure to move quickly, but when they're finished, when they arrived, there is no sense of relief or, yes, great, it just took me 3 minutes to the bus instead of 4.5. So now I've saved 90 seconds and scroll on my phone instead. What is that? Where is that rooted in trauma? Well, potentially when at home, being slow or idle was judged and not accepted by your parents. Then it's also related to shame and hypervigilance. For example, one false step has terrible consequences, so you better hurry up. Alcohol in the family, for example, when one family member has been super religious, okay, when some person had borderline personality disorder. So those things definitely could create an environment where you always had to be careful and on the run, because at any time things could break apart. Another hypothesis that I had is that it's also a flight mechanism. So you have the need or the urgency here to run away. This can also be part of that. Remember the polyvagal theory. Symptom number 13 is what I call rejection overdrive. And that's basically an intense fear of being rejected here. It's overreacting on things like, for example, delayed text messages by your partner, by just making someone aware of something by small criticism. Maybe you are someone who has this symptom. Maybe you are someone who has a partner who has this symptom, or you know someone who has that. Okay, there's just a small trigger. Someone is 30 seconds late, or someone sent a text message that you or the person misunderstood, and they're burning, they're angry, they're mad at you, they're upset. They feel rejected from their deepest part of their personality. And this is what rejection overdrive basically is. They interpret those things as a personal attack, and it's triggering overwhelm, anxiety, and self-doubt out of their core in them. This is also linked to emotional dysregulation, of course, to missing boundaries in adulthood. If you know someone who has that, or if you have this tendency, definitely learn to set better boundaries and don't see that as an attack right now. It's not criticism, it's just something that's missing here for you, and that would be very helpful. Well, what I observed also, when you have someone who sometimes has this tendency, then also people become super cold afterwards, after they have been triggered. That's another protection mechanism which is related to the rejection overdrive here, because what they do is, when they feel deeply triggered in such a situation, they just cut the connection so you won't hurt them anymore. Makes sense, right? Where does that come from? It's definitely linked to anxious attachment in childhood. So a fear of abandonment, a fear of rejection here. Those children learn that people will often leave them, or the mom left them, the dad left them, they have been left alone, they haven't been seen, they haven't been heard in childhood, their needs and wants have been neglected. That's so typical here. So there was no stable unconditional love from the caregivers. Symptom number 14, the if X then Y formula. Maybe you know that. When you are someone who has that, then you never just decide on things. So you don't make clear decisions. You only take action, X, if specific circumstances Y are met. Are you such a person? I want to be honest. So you're always waiting for the perfect moment, basically, here. Okay, examples. I will pursue my dream job once I feel more confident. Or I will start exercising when things settle down. What that is, it's procrastination at its best, of course. And it's also a strategy to avoid pain. It's a strategy to avoid specific emotions that you don't like. Those things could be, for example, if you don't like change at all, or if you don't like the feeling of giving up control, for example, when you leave your comfort zone, those kind of things. It can also be linked to neurodivergence, such as ADHD, so it's also a typical symptom of ADHD, but for another reason. That's another topic here. Where's that rooted in childhood? Is definitely rooted there that the independence of a child wasn't nurtured. So the child was constantly self-doubting their skills and their competence because the child was told that it didn't deserve specific things or that it doesn't have what it takes to be X, Y, Z. So it's a deeply installed negative belief system here. Another big belief is, of course, you are not good enough. Also very typical for that category. And it's really closely tied, this behavior, to inner child dynamics. Another story that I could tell here is of a friend, and he's procrastinating switching his job for a really long time now. And I often see him, and it's pretty sad to me because I see he has so much potential, but he's just procrastinating that. And he could have a well-paid job. He could be in a really good position, and he likes to do that. But there is someone in the family, some part of his family which is rich, has a lot of money, power, and his mom always said, those people are arrogant, those people are wrong, I don't like those people, money is bad. Okay, he has this belief money is bad, and of course this nurtured his belief system, and now he's not able to break free from that and is procrastinating that because he doesn't want to become someone who is rich, has money, and that is not being loved by his mother. Symptom number 15, last but not least, is hypervigilance fatigue. And hypervigilance fatigue is also pre-stage emotional burnout. So we have to take that seriously. Now, emotional and physical exhaustion come from constant scanning for threats. And it's that we believe that we have to fulfill other people's expectations. This is also typical for an avoidant attachment style here, definitely. So we can never just relax. We can just relax alone. And this is also a reason why so many of us constantly isolate. And for those people, when we experienced that relationships were not safe and we became avoidant attached people, then we constantly experience relationships as a threat and as difficult. Where did that come from in childhood? Well, it comes from a developed early on avoidant attachment style. So people have that, they learned early on that they solely can rely on themselves. I have that. I always told myself when I was 10, 12 years old, one-man army always wins, because I thought, well, I'm the only person who I can rely on. It's also typical that co-regulation, so using other people as help, as support to re-regulate ourselves when things become difficult. It was not an option for people who are avoidantly attached. This comes from an unpredictable environment and difficult relationships, again, with the caregivers, often ambivalent relationships, and it led to a parentification of the child. So we as children had to take care of our mom's or dad's needs. And this is also, it comes from that our parents couldn't re-regulate themselves during difficult situations. They were a source of instability and not a source of regulation. And after hearing those 15 signs now, let's talk about the solutions. A very, very good solution, because we are talking about many relationship attached and inner child tied topics here, is definitely therapy, especially group therapy, because group therapy helps us to make to make new experiences. And this is what's actually helping us to heal, making new positive experiences. A supportive environment is one of the most helpful things that you can experience in order to treat those symptoms. For the sleeping issues, one thing which helps me quite often is honestly sleeping just close to a wall or putting my mattress next to the bed so I feel a bit more cozy. I made an episode about that in the past. It's called the Stone Age episode, what Stone Age people did. Melatonin also helps me 2 to 5 milligrams, but not in recommendation, of course. So yeah, you could try that definitely for your sleeping issues. What's tremendously helpful in order to heal from those symptoms is, and I said that quite often in the podcast already, setting boundaries, communicating your needs, expressing your emotions. Why is that helpful? Because it reduces symptoms such as dissociation, feeling like the naked cat, and if you want to resolve those symptoms, definitely become a member of our platform. Watch the courses. I'm regularly updating the courses as well. I'm just working at a new course on how to set boundaries. Join our community today, understandable.net/join, and give me feedback on the courses. Pretty curious there as well. For things such as perfectionism, for rushing nowhere, for people who are high achievers, what's helpful there is definitely talking to your inner child. Journaling a lot helps as well. Getting a connection, creating awareness within your inner child, within your inner dialogue here. Or I also talked to many people who recommended internal family systems, IFS therapy here. I made an episode about that, a podcast with someone, an interview. Link that up here as well in the description below if you are curious about IFS. And for somatic related symptoms like hypervigilance, emotional dysregulation, and dissociation as well, there I can recommend somatic therapy like NARM, for example. I did that. Body related or body focused therapy like somatic experience by Dr. Peter Levine, for example, is another option. And hypnotherapy could also be an option. I did NARM therapy and hypnotherapy. And to me, NARM therapy was very good to understanding the concept of boundaries. And I went more into depth with it in my hypnotherapy session. I made a full episode about all those treatment options and ranked them from best to worst for the best trauma recovery. I'll link to you that episode below as well. Now I'm pretty curious, which symptoms can you relate to? Definitely let me know in the comments. And if you want to support the podcast, leave a 5-star review here on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and I see and speak to you next Sunday for another episode here on the channel. Have a great day.